Good morning, Dartmouth and Uxbridge High Schools. I'm Will Higgins, an English teacher at Dartmouth High School, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's special presentation. We've read about history in our textbooks. We have Googled topics on the internet. We've even watched documentaries on the History Channel. But there are very few opportunities in our lives to actually listen to someone who has survived and truly lived moments of history. Today, you'll have the unique experience and privilege of hearing firsthand from a woman who is both a witness to and, as a Holocaust survivor, a victim of history. I hope that you will listen, understand, and appreciate the message of hope, courage, and compassion that she will share with you today. It's my honor and privilege to introduce to you our special guest, Mrs. Marion Blumental Lazan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Thank you, Mr. Higgins, for your meaningful and kind introduction. I thank you, Principal Shea, and Uxbridge High School Principal, Dr. Rubin, for giving me the opportunity to speak to and with your Dartmouth and Uxbridge High School students. And Mrs. Brittingham, thank you for sharing your tech expertise with us. I'm here this morning with all of you to share my story. It is my childhood experiences during World War II in the concentration camps. I will tell you about our liberation and how we finally started our lives anew in our blessed United States of America. Mine is a story that Anne Frank might have told had she survived. This is also a story that conveys a message of perseverance, determination, faith, and above all, hope. After the presentation, I will be pleased to answer some of your questions. I hear some disturbance in the background. Can we lower the sound on your end?
Yeah, I'm going to mute myself right now. Give me 1 second.
Life in the early 1930s in Germany was very much for my family, as it is here for most of you today. Never did we think that the anti-Semitic incidents there would ever lead to very much. My father was in a successful shoe business in a small town. My parents, 2-year older brother, and I lived comfortably with my grandparents above the shoe store. Life for Jews was made increasingly more difficult, and in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were formulated and enforced. The following are just some of the many restrictions imposed on the Jews in Germany. Jews were not allowed into theaters, into parks, or into swimming pools. All public schools were closed to Jewish children. Then there was an evening curfew for the Jews. Jews were only allowed to shop during specific hours of the day, and non-Jews were not allowed to shop in Jewish-owned stores. Non-Jews were just not allowed to associate with Jewish people. And then a big letter J for Jew was stamped on ID cards and on passports. These restrictions went on, and it was then that my parents decided to make arrangements to leave the country. My grandparents, who were in the late 70s and ill, refused to leave their home. They could not understand the urgency or the necessity of doing so. My grandparents passed away in 1938, just 11 days within each other, and soon thereafter, we received our necessary papers for our emigration to America. I was just 4 years old at that time. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night. It was the night of broken glass when the Nazis and their many followers smashed the windows and the storefronts of Jewish-owned stores. Jewish establishments, synagogues, and Jewish books were burned and destroyed. This was the beginning of a massive pogrom against the Jews in Germany, a massive verbal and physical assault against all German Jews. In reality, this was the beginning of the Holocaust. On November 12th, following Kristallnacht, the German government actually fined the Jewish population for the damage caused that night. These imposed taxes were used to rearm Germany. The night of Kristallnacht, our apartment was ransacked. All valuables were thrown into pillowcase and taken away. But worst of all was that they forcibly transported my father to concentration camp Buchenwald in Germany. All sorts of terrible stories were related to my mother, and we did not know we would ever see my father again. He was released after 3 weeks, only because our papers were in order for our emigration to America. And to think that just a few years prior, he had been awarded the Iron Cross for his military service in the German army of World War I. We were forced to sell both our home and our business for a fraction of its worth. And soon thereafter, in January of 1939, we left for Holland, from where we were to sail to the United States. And for almost 9 months, while awaiting our quota number from the American State Department, my parents were assigned to take care of some 125 children. These young children had been sent by their parents from various parts of Europe to escape from the Nazis. In December of that year, 1939, we were deported to the detention camp of Westerbork in Holland to await our departure day to America. Camp Westerbork was constructed by the Dutch to accommodate Jews from various parts of Europe. In May of 1940, just 1 month before our planned departure date, the Germans invaded Holland and we were trapped. All of our belongings that were about to be loaded on board ship were burned and destroyed as the harbor of Rotterdam was bombed. Under Dutch control, Camp Westerbork was tolerable. My mother, father, brother, and I shared 2 small rooms. We all ate in a communal dining room, and at that time there was enough food for us so that we did not go hungry. Adults were assigned to various work duties. My father worked to pay his shoes. My mother worked in the kitchen. We children had a makeshift education and lived a very dull, stagnant life. Several months later, when the Nazi SS took over the command of Westerbork, we became acquainted with the ever-present, terrifying 12-foot-high barbed wire. And as thousands of Jews were rounded up, many taken from the hiding places, as was Anne Frank and her family, Camp Westerbork became overcrowded. And it was at that time that we had to share our small quarters with another family. And then the dreadful transports to the concentration and extermination camps in Eastern Europe began. This started in early 1942, and from then on, every Monday night, lists of those to be deported were posted, causing incredible anxiety, anguish, and fear. And then on Tuesday mornings, men, women, and little ones were marched to a nearby railroad platform from where they were transported. This area became known as Boulevard de Misère. It was an area of complete misery. At 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, the trains left for their destination. And of the total 120,000 men, women, and children that departed Westerbork, 102,000 were doomed never to return. In January of 1944, it was our turn to be shipped out. We children were actually glad for a change of environment. We were very naive, and we welcomed the move. We were allowed to take 1 knapsack each, and whatever we could stuff into it, we were permitted to take. When we approached the railroad platform and we saw the cattle cars in which we were to travel, our fears began to mount. Adults suspected, and they somehow knew what was in store for us. I remember that it was a bitter cold, pitch-black, rainy night when we arrived at our destination, concentration camp Bergen-Belsen in Germany. We were pulled and dragged out of the cattle cars and greeted by the German guards who were shouting at us and threatening us with their weapons and with the most vicious attack dogs by their sides. I was a very frightened 9-year-old, and to this day I still feel a certain sense of fear whenever I see a German Shepherd. Bergen-Belsen was divided into various areas. It was sectioned off and surrounded by electrified barbed wire. Guards were always in strategically placed high guard towers, and in the evenings, as soon as it would turn dark, the bright searchlights from above would constantly sweep the campgrounds. We were placed in a section that was known as the Sternlager, or the Star Camp, named so because we had to continue wearing that yellow star which had been issued to us back in Holland. Men were on one side of the camp and the women on the other, and this did make it possible at times for families to get a glimpse of one another. We were placed in this particular section of the camp with the hope of being exchanged for German nationals in Palestine, who the British put under house arrest because they were citizens of an enemy country. Unfortunately, that hope never materialized for our family. 600 of us, 600 of our people were crammed into each of the crude, wooden, heatless barracks meant for 100 when originally built. There were triple-decker bunk beds with 2 people sharing each bunk. German winters were bitter cold and very long. We were given only one thin blanket per bunk and a straw-filled mattress, and this bunk was our only living quarters, and that for 2 people. I was very fortunate that I was able to share a bunk with my mother, and that my brother was able to share a bunk with our father. But can you imagine 2 adults, 2 strangers, sharing a bunk under such horrendous conditions, a bunk that was no larger than the small cot bed that we're all so familiar with? I remember the first time seeing a wagon filled with what I thought was firewood for the one small oven that we had in our barrack. That oven, of course, was never used. I soon realized that what was in the wagon were dead, naked bodies thrown one on top of the other. Toilets and so-called washing facilities were at a great distance in the most primitive outhouses. Toilets were long wooden benches with holes cut into them, one next to the other. There was no privacy. There was no toilet paper. There was no soap, and hardly ever any water with which to wash. And in the almost year and a half that we were in Bergen-Belsen, never once were we able to brush our teeth. There were no trees, no flowers, nor did we ever see a blade of grass. And whenever it rained, we had to slush through the mud, adding even more misery to our already dismal existence. Every morning, every single morning, without fail, we were ordered to line up on a huge field. It was called an Appellplatz, 5 in a row as we were counted. We would have to stand there until each and every one of us was accounted for, often from early morning till late at night, without food, without water, no matter what the weather, without protective clothing. Frostbite was common. We would treat our affected toes and fingers with the warmth of our own urine. Our diet consisted of a slice of bread a day, some hot watery soup with grizzly meats and turnips and potato peel. Bread was later cut back and given to us just once a week, and only if our so-called quarters were neat and in order. Our birthday present to one another was that little piece of bread that we had saved up from the previous week. Once a month, we were marched to an area to shower, and there, under the watchful eyes of the guards, we were ordered to undress. We had heard about exterminations and gas chambers in other areas of Europe, and we therefore were never sure when the faucets were turned on as to what would come out, water or gas. The Nazis did their utmost to break us physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Unfortunately, they did succeed with many of our people. It was not uncommon for people who were no longer responsible for their actions to attempt escape, even though they knew that the chance to succeed was next to impossible. But they also felt that they had nothing more to lose. The failure of their attempts were obvious when we saw their lifeless bodies hanging electrocuted against the barbed wire. Malnutrition, dysentery, and the loss of the will to go on is what destroyed body and mind. Death was an everyday occurrence. The dark, crowded quarters often caused us to trip and fall over the dead. Bodies could not be taken away fast enough. We as children saw things that no one, no matter what the age, should ever have to see. I know, of course, that you've all heard, you've read, you've studied, you might have seen movies. Adults most likely have seen true documentaries about the Holocaust. But the constant foul odor, the filth, continuous horror, and fear surrounded by death is indescribable. There is no way that this can be put accurately into words or pictures. Our bodies, hair, and clothes were infested with lice. We learned that there's a distinct difference between head lice and clothes lice. Squashing them between my thumbnails became my primary pastime. Much of my time was taken up with make-believe games, and one game, a game based on superstition, became very important to me. I decided that if I were to find 4 pebbles of about the same size and shape, that would mean that the 4 members of my family would all survive. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. It was a torturous, painful, very difficult game to play. What if I couldn't find the third or fourth pebble? Might that mean that 1 or 2 of my family members would not pull through? Nevertheless, this game gave me something to hold on to, some distant hope. After a number of months on our meager diets, our stomach shrunk so that the hunger was no longer painful. Teenagers and men suffered most from malnutrition and were the first to die. Those who lasted the longest were the women, and mothers in particular. It was their strong will to keep their children alive that kept them going. And my mother was one of those remarkable ladies. There is no doubt in my mind that it was my mother's inner strength and fortitude that finally saw us through. One day, my mother was able to smuggle some potatoes and some salt from the kitchen where she worked, and somehow managed to cook some soup in secret. This was done on our bunk. I was on a bunk with her, trying to hide and shield what she was doing. Soup was simmering, just about finished, when the German guards entered our barrack for surprise inspection. In our rush to hide that setup, the boiling soup spilled on my leg. We had been taught self-discipline and self-control the hard way, for I knew for sure, had I cried out, it would have cost us our lives. This happened in the spring of 1945. I was just 10 years old. The population in Camp Bergen-Belsen were dying off rapidly, but not nearly fast enough to satisfy the Nazis. Several weeks later, it was decided to send 3 trainloads of our people to Eastern Europe, towards the extermination camps and the gas chambers. We did not know that Auschwitz with its gas chambers had already been liberated. My family was among the 2,500 on the last of these 3 trains. It was April of 1945. Russian army was closing in from the northeast, and the British and the Americans from the west. Under normal conditions, this train ride from Bergen-Belsen to whatever area of Eastern Europe they wanted to send us would have taken no more than 10 hours. But because the Germans tried to evade the Allies, we were en route for 2 long weeks, without food, without water, without medical supplies, without sanitary facilities. That meant no toilets. Whenever a train came to a stop, those who were able and those who were strong enough were permitted to get out and take a drink from a nearby stream or dig up roots to eat. My mother remembered taking some sort of a pot and collecting water from the locomotive, and who knows what else a pot was used for. The need for water at that time was almost more important than food because of the severe dehydration due to the dysentery and the high fever due to the typhus. Let me briefly explain typhus. It is a highly contagious, deadly disease that's caused from filth and spread by lice. At the same time, while the train was at a standstill, the newly dead were taken off and buried along the tracks. In addition, our train was subject to frequent air attacks by the Allies. It is truly remarkable how any one of us was able to survive under such horrendous conditions. In fact, 500 of our people, that's 1 out of every 5, died en route or shortly thereafter. My burnt leg was severely infected, and it was impossible to keep the wound clean or lice-free. In late April, after 14 days of this surreal and horrifying journey, German guards stormed frantically through the train, seeking civilian clothing so that they would not be recognized by the Allies. And we knew then that the war was coming to an end. It was the Russian army that liberated our train and led us to a nearby farm village in eastern Germany. Most of the inhabitants had fled, and we took over their homes. Kitchens were stocked with ample food. It was rich and good, actually much too good for our starved bodies. We could not tolerate that unfamiliar nourishment. And at that time, at the age of 10 and a half, I weighed 16 kilos, or as we know it here, 35 pounds. And my mother weighed a mere 70 pounds. The Russians, in a crude way, tried to help us the best that they could. I was brought to a nearby clinic for medical attention. My leg was in very bad condition, and I was close to losing it. Fortunately, it was decided to treat the wound, and I was very lucky that my leg responded to medication, and it gradually healed. As I regained my strength, I also relearned to walk. And in the interim, our heads were shaved because that was the only way that we could rid ourselves of head lice. Although we were all weak, ill, and thoroughly exhausted, I vividly remember the spring of 1945. Weather was beautiful, sunny and bright. Trees and grass were lush and green. Flowers were in bloom. Birds were singing. It was a wonderful, exciting feeling to be free at long last. We were all ill with typhus, but my father had to die from it 6 weeks after our liberation, and this after 6.5 years of mental torment and physical abuse. My 12-year-old brother Albert actually helped bury our father. When I talk about those years, it is as though I'm relating a nightmare, a very bad dream. I separate myself from it ever having happened to me, and that is how I deal with it. It is a wonderful story as to how we gradually recuperated and were sent back to Holland to start our lives anew. My brother and I were eventually placed in a children's home in preparation to live in what was then British-mandated Palestine, and we know today as Israel. Most of the children in this home survived alone, without their parents. I felt like a total misfit. I needed to learn how to resettle into a normal society. Had no training for that. Here I was by this time, 11 years old. Had never been in a store, had no idea what money was all about, had almost no table manners. It was like learning to live all over again. It was in this home that we became reacquainted with life in its normal state. Meals served us were delicious and nourishing, and you can imagine that just about anything and everything tasted good to us. Although our surrogate parents provided a very strict environment, much love and care were given us. I began my first formal education at that time at the age of 11 and a half. We were taught the secular subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic, in a Montessori school where we progressed at our own pace. The Dutch language in which we were taught was all new to us. We also received a thorough education in Hebrew and in religious studies. The British, who were governing Palestine in the 1940s, had issued what was known as the White Paper, restricting the number of Jews permitted into the land. They were intercepting many of the refugee ships and interning the survivors on the island of Cyprus, and in some cases, turning the ships back to Europe. In November of 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine between Arabs and Jews, which in May of 1948 led to the establishment of the State of Israel. In 1947, just 1 year prior to Israel becoming a state, our illegal voyage from Holland to Palestine was planned, and danger once again loomed over us. And because parents at that time were not permitted to accompany their children, my mother managed to make arrangements for a family of 3 to emigrate to the United States. And thanks to the Holland America line, we were able to use the tickets which had been purchased 10 years earlier. We arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, April 23rd, 1948, by coincidence, exactly 3 years to the day of our liberation. It was a Jewish relief organization, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, that found a home for us in Peoria, Illinois. I had never heard of Illinois, definitely not Peoria. And there, at the age of 13, I once again started life anew in a strange land and again learning a new language, my third new language in less than 3 years. First Dutch, then Hebrew, and now English. And because of my inability to speak English, I, at the age of 13, was placed in the 4th grade with 9-year-olds. Although both my brother and I worked long hours after school to help our mom pay bills, I nevertheless found time, I actually made time, to take extra courses during the year, attend summer school, and by working very hard in my studies, I was able to be graduated from Peoria Central High School 5 years later at age 18, ranking 8th in a class of 267 students. It was 2 months after high school graduation that I was married to Nathaniel Lazan, who I had met at the age of 16 in Peoria in the synagogue. And we're so grateful, so very grateful to have celebrated our 71st wedding anniversary this past August. And you might be interested to know that Nathaniel was a U.S. Air Force pilot, and of course is very disciplined and very conscientious. I am grateful. I am very grateful that I survived healthy in body, mind, and spirit, and that together with my husband, I'm able to perpetuate my heritage with a wonderful family. We have 3 grown children, all 3 are happily married, and have given us 9 beautiful grandchildren and 13 magnificent great-grandchildren. Amazing, amazing. And in March of 1996, my memoir, 4 Perfect Pebbles, co-authored by Lila Pearl, was published by Green Willow, division of HarperCollins. It is now in its 34th printing in hardback. And then a few years ago, Harper decided to publish a 20th anniversary edition. That this is it. I don't know if you can see this. I really don't bother even looking at it because I don't like the cover anyway. It's this barbed wire that really bothers me. But Harper was in charge, and that's it. Scholastic Book Club has made it available since 1999. It's been published and translated into German and into Dutch and French also. And Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, published it in Hebrew. I don't know if you can see this. This is my image when I was 7 years old. And if you like, you may all read it in Japanese. Maybe there's someone in your school who can do just that. But above all, I am so grateful that the story is in book form so that it can be passed on to future generations. And I'm thrilled that a documentary has been made entitled Marion's Triumph with the actress Deborah Messing as the narrator. So you see that despite all the terrible things that happened to me as a child, my life today is full and rewarding. Although I've spoken to upward of 2.5 million students and adults over these past 25 years or so, it still has not become easy. However, I do realize the importance of sharing that period of our history with you, simply because in a few short years, we will not be here any longer to give a first-hand account. Yours is the very last generation that will hear these stories firsthand. And I therefore ask you to please share my story or any of the Holocaust stories that you read and hear about. Share them with your friends, share them with your relatives. And someday share them with your children. And yes, even with your grandchildren. When we are not here any longer, it is you who will have to bear witness. As difficult as it is, the horror of the Holocaust must be taught, must be studied, and kept alive. Only then can we guard it from ever happening again. This is the very yellow star that I was forced to wear. It says Jude, which in German means Jew. It was just another way to denigrate us, to isolate us, and to set us apart from the rest of society. This represents the Star of David, a beautiful, meaningful Jewish symbol. But the Nazis made it so very ugly. Each of us, each and every one of us must do everything in our power to prevent such hatred, such destruction, and such terror from reoccurring. And we can begin by having love, respect, and compassion towards one another, regardless of the religious belief, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of the national origin. This respect towards one another must begin in our homes, around the kitchen table, the dining room table, wherever we gather as a family. We, the adults, must pass it on our places of business. You, the students, in your classrooms, in the halls of your schools, communities, towns, cities. And only if there's respect and compassion towards one another in the countries can we expect to have peace in the world. We must begin with you, the students. We must begin with our children. Let us treat people as individuals. Let us look for similarities and respect the differences. Let us build bridges and reach out towards one another. And we must be true to ourselves and not blindly follow a leader without thinking ahead and searching our hearts and our minds as to what the consequences might be. It is not cool to follow just anyone's lead without first checking to see what his or her true intentions are. Please remember these messages. Share them with your friends who are unable to be with us this morning. Share them, remember them, but above all, let us all live by them. We are all aware, or we should be, that 6 million Jewish people were murdered during the Holocaust. 6 million. Your state of Massachusetts has a population of approximately 7 million. Can you possibly imagine almost the entire population of Massachusetts wiped out? The 6 million also represent 1/3 of the entire pre-World War II Jewish population. Among them were 1.5 million children just like you. We also need to remember that there were 5 million non-Jews who lost their lives. Among them were the righteous Gentiles, as we refer to them. Very special people, non-Jews, who jeopardized their lives to save Jewish families. They would hide them in the attics. They would hide them in the basements. Farmers would hide them out in the barns. They were hidden in convents. And when these good people were caught doing what they felt was the right thing to do, they also were deported to concentration camps and in many cases lost their lives. And that brings me to another message. We must never generalize and judge an entire group by the actions of some within that group. These are all universal messages, messages that each and every one of us is familiar with, but need to be reminded of over and over again. And this certainly was a good opportunity to do so. These messages are the lessons learned from that dark period of our history, and certainly apply to today's world situation, and definitely to our own individual lives. By listening, I hope that you prevent our past from becoming your future. Okay, I now need to share something with you about an extraordinary lady. 1 minute. Okay. This, I don't know if you can see this clearly. This was my mother at age 104. Mom passed away 6 weeks short of 105. An amazing, magnificent, beautiful lady. There were two things that my mother demanded of my brother and me when we first came to America. Number one, learn English. Learn it quickly. Number two, work as hard as you can at school and at work in order to succeed. You need to know that my mom was 40 years old when we came to America, knew absolutely no English, learned to read, write, and speak a magnificent English. Amazing. When Mom was still with us, we were 5 generations of women, and I refer to that as survival and continuity, and it certainly was that. She was a fabulous mother-in-law to Nathaniel, and he was an outstanding son-in-law to my mom. My brother, Albert, passed away a few years ago, dealt with this altogether differently than I. He did not talk about it as freely as you heard it from me this morning. Was happily married, lived in California, but by choice did not bring children into this world. Had a very difficult time with organized religion. All of that made me very sad. But I didn't fault Albert. We have to remember he was 2 years older than I am, was with my father in the men's section, and I'm convinced that he saw and experienced things that I did not. God puts us on this earth, gives us a beautiful mind. It is this mind that allows us to choose right from wrong, good from evil. Therefore, men did this towards one another. But did he have to make it so bitterly cold when we were standing out there on the Pell all day? I have a direct line. I ask loads of questions. Don't get too many answers, but that's okay. Faith I will always have. After all, here I am, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, 13 great-grandchildren, from whom generations will be forthcoming. He made sure that enough of us survived so that we will always be here. I am proud of my faith, as I'm certain you're proud of your faith and of your heritage. But please, please, let us all remember to respect the right of others to their belief. Be kind and good and respectful and compassionate towards one another. That is the basis for peace. Had there been respect and compassion towards one another some 75, 80 years ago, I would not be here this morning with you to share that dark period of our history. 9/11 would not have occurred. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, the Ukraine, the Middle East, all these countries that are in such turmoil would be peaceful countries for its people. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another, please. It is such a simple message and yet so difficult to achieve. There is very little that we can do against the negativity in our world, but how we treat, behave, and reach out towards one another, that is entirely up to us. Did I ever find my 4 pebbles? Frequently asked question. I always found my 4 pebbles. I made it my business to find them. When I searched for them, and I would always put them in a safe place. The next time I searched for them, I couldn't find that third one or that fourth one. Well, I knew exactly where to go and pick them up. Maybe that was cheating, but it was my game, and guess who made the rules? You need to know that I was only about 9 or 10 years old when things were at its absolute worst. We had nothing to occupy our time with constructively. No paper, no pencils, no books, certainly no games. So I was lucky at such an imaginative mind. My imaginative games were always based on a positive attitude. I would search for a piece of glass or a piece of a mirror, whatever I could find on that dirt ground in Bergen-Belsen. And when the sun would shine, that little piece of glass would cast a reflection onto the ground, and that little wiggly reflection, it became my pet. As long as the sun would shine, I would have my pet, and my pet would never ever die. I would also imagine that one day I once again would have my 3 Bs. And these 3 Bs represent our everyday comforts and necessities that we all take so much for granted. First B represented a bed. I knew that someday I once again would have my very own bed with a real mattress, clean sheets, and enough blankets to keep me warm. Second B represented a bath, warm water, soap, clean towels, and with that would come toothpaste and a toothbrush, of course. And the third B was bread. I knew that someday I once again would have enough bread so that I would never again go hungry. These imaginative games, if you will, they were my survival techniques. They were my survival skills. Do you know that we all have survival techniques and skills within us? When the need arises, we just have to search for them, find them, and be sure that we put them to work. No one is spared adversity. No one is spared hardship. We all have to overcome obstacles at one time or another. But with perseverance, with determination, with faith, and above all hope, one can overcome just about anything and everything. Above all, never, ever give up hope. It is not so much what happens to a person, it's how we deal with the situation that makes the difference. I came to America and I got acquainted with potato chips. And whoever was eating them was dipping in something white and creamy. I didn't know from dips, so I thought it was mayonnaise. Well, I couldn't wait to get my own big bag of potato chips and my own jar of mayonnaise. And did that do a job on me. I very quickly became a big 13-year-old. And remember, there I was with these little 9-year-olds. You know, that could have made plenty fun of me. I looked differently than they did, certainly acted differently than they did. But I need you to know that they were so good to me, helped me with my homework, included me in their games. I hope that when a new student comes into your class, your school, or community, that you too help him or her to adjust to a new situation. Put yourself in his or her place, how you might feel if you're placed in a strange or new environment. Be good and kind and respectful towards one another. And you, the students at the Dartmouth and Uxbridge High Schools, you are so fortunate to be receiving a good education in beautiful environments with dedicated teachers. Do not take your educational opportunities for granted. Make the most of it. Give your studies an extra measure of hard work. You will never, ever regret it. Nathaniel is from New York. He went to Bradley University in Peoria. Lucky me. He went home on vacations, and way back then in the 1950s, long-distance telephone calls were very expensive. Remember, there were no computers or texting or any of that technology. But with a 3-cent stamp, and there really was such a thing as a 3-cent stamp, we would write to one another every single day. Major, major problems. In his letters to me, he would add 5 words. There were more than 5 words, Nathaniel.
Only 5, Marion.
Only 5, but there were more than 5. But whatever. He asked me to define those words and put them into a sentence. That's a lot of nerve with all I had to do, but I knew he meant to help me with my English, and I guess it did work. So, Nathaniel, once again, I thank you.
Once again, I say you're quite welcome.
Okay. Talking about a dictionary. My father always carried, did I mention I'd use a dictionary? Yes, I did. Did I mention I'd use a dictionary, right? And I would use a dictionary when I wrote my reply to Nathaniel. I would always have a dictionary by my side, and only when I was satisfied with the way the letter was written would I dare mail it to him. But talking about a dictionary, my father always carried a little chunky German English dictionary with him, and he would study the vocabulary in secret whenever possible, always with the hope that someday he would reach America. When we came to the United States back in 1948 and approached New York Harbor, we were told the night before that if we wanted to see the Statue of Liberty, we needed to be on deck bright and early the next morning. Well, you can be sure that each and every one of us was on deck to greet and be greeted by that magnificent symbol of freedom, the freedom that had been denied us for so many years. And when that tall figure of that longed-for symbol appeared, I became too choked up to talk. So many emotions seized me at once. Joy and gratitude, bitterness for the cruelty we and so many others had suffered, and deep, deep sadness that my father would never know that we have reached America at last. And when we crossed the thing, let me have this. And when we crossed the Verrazano Bridge, the Verrazano Bridge here in New York connects the borough of Staten Island with that of Brooklyn. And when we crossed that bridge, I would always crane my neck to see the Statue of Liberty. To me, it is one of the most magnificent, beautiful sights. We returned to Germany on various occasions. The very first time was back in 1995. It was the 50th anniversary of our liberation. And we visited my father's grave. And the reason my father and about 60 others have a private resting place in that farm village where we were liberated was because they died after some of the chaos had subsided. Those who died early on were all buried in mass graves. We also went to Bergen-Belsen, and Bergen-Belsen looks nothing the way I remembered it. Had been burned down under the direction of President Eisenhower, who was then the commander of the Allied forces. And so today, Bergen-Belsen looks like a park. Green grass, shrubs, trees, really not bad looking at all, except for the mounds everywhere, mounds with flags that read, "Here lie 1,000, here lie 2,500. These are the mass graves of our people. We also went to my former hometown of Hoya near Hanover, and they were greeted by public officials who over and over and apologized. And then there was one young couple born after the war who took us to the Jewish cemetery, which has been in terrible disarray, had not been cared for since 1938, took us to our family plot, and there among the toppled over stones was a brand new shiny granite footstone with the inscription, "Zur Erinnerung an die zerstörte Grabstelle der Familie Blumenthal, Hoya 1894 bis 1938. In memory of the desecrated plot of the Blumenthal family, Hoya 1894 to 1938, placed there by this non-Jewish young couple, unbeknownst to us, a most beautiful, generous, kind gesture. Never thought that I would refer to non-Jewish Germans in such glowing terms. It's people like these that renew one's faith in humanity and have become dear, dear friends of ours. And whenever we return, I speak in schools, university, churches, do so in German, and tremendously well received, but oh so difficult for today's young people to hear. After all, it happened in their country by their own people, their own grandparents and great-grandparents' generation. It's a huge, huge burden for these young people, and unfortunately, it will be their burden for generations to come. And then we returned back in 2010 because a brand new public high school was named in my honor in my former hometown. So now we have the Marion Blumental Oberschule in Hoya. Tremendous celebration and very courageous for this little town to redress what happened so many years ago in the midst. And the night before the celebration, we commemorated the night of broken glass on the site where our synagogue once stood. Yes, difficult trips, but no regrets having returned. I do want to add that Germany is doing everything in its power to continually remind their people as to what happened so many years ago. For one thing, it is mandatory for the subject to be taught in their schools, and it's against the law to deny that the Holocaust has happened. And then they came up with something that's called ein Stolperstein, a stumbling block. You don't stumble over it. It's a metal plaque that's deeply embedded in the sidewalk in front of the home where the person once lived and never returned. And on that plaque is engraved his or her name, date of birth, where, when, and how he or she died. A tremendous tribute to the person who never returned. Okay, I will take some of your questions, please, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, Mr. Higgins.
Hi, Marion. We'd like you to hear our applause first.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You were a wonderful audience. I could see you all, and you were a wonderful audience. I wish I could have been with you in person. Maybe next time. Okay.
And happy birthday, Marion.
Oh, that's tomorrow, right?
Happy birthday, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's only a number. Okay.
We just have a couple of questions, Marion, that we'll give you that were solicited by our students. So here's the first question. What's your advice to the younger generations in terms of remembering the Holocaust?
Okay, you all heard the question and you heard the answer while I was speaking, right? To remember, and to remember and never to forget, and to please be respectful towards one another. Be kind towards one another. That is the basis for peace. Such a simple message and yet so difficult to achieve. There's so little we can do against all this negativity in our world. But again, how we treat and behave towards one another, that's entirely up to us. So be good towards one another. Pass that information on to those who were not participating in this morning's presentation and visit. Be good towards one another, please.
Marion, here's another one. How were children cared for in the camps? Were parents able to care for their own children, or is it the responsibility of guards?
Of guards? You're telling me guards would take care of the children? They were, the guards only wanted to get rid of us. No. And parents did the best they could. There was one particular family who would take children in and take them in the best that they could and sort of watched over them. Not that they could give them anything more to eat or ease their pain, but there's some families who helped and protected children who were left parentless the best they could. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Marion, just one more question for you. This is a kind of a long one, but the Austrian psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl once wrote, "The last of one's freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance." What attitude toward life and others did you have that helped you survive through your experiences?
Well, I was extremely fortunate to have always been with my mother, who has a very positive attitude, has a wonderful, her fortitude and her thinking and her hope. She never gave up hope. and she instilled that positive thinking onto me. I was very fortunate. Not all children have that. So I tribute my mother for my survival, 100%, and for my way of dealing with the situation, and never to give in, never to give up, never to give up hope, ever. That is the basis for survival, really. If you give in, then you may as well give up, and that's the end of it. Do I still speak those languages? Ik spreek een klein beetje Hollands. I speak a little bit of Dutch. I nehme de Berre de Vrieketsat. I speak some Hebrew. Ich spreche ein sehr gutes Deutsch. I speak an excellent German, and I do speak some English. I'm often asked whether I have a tattoo on my arm. I do not. That was done in Auschwitz only. You need to know that there were hundreds of camps, major camps, sub-camps, but it was in Auschwitz only where they burned that number on innocent men, women, and children for no reason other than to torment them, to inflict additional pain, and to dehumanize them. It's a mentality none of us will ever, ever understand. We're so grateful, Mr. Higgins, for having this opportunity and to speak with your students and with the students of the Uxbridge High School. And this would not have been possible without this technology. And talking about technology, please, you guys, use it for good only. Use this technology for good only. Do not disparage others. Do not intimidate others. Do not embarrass your friends. And please don't believe everything you see on the internet and on the, what is this thing called, social media. Don't believe everything. There's so much misinformation out there. Use your own bright, brilliant minds before you make decisions and before you lead anyone's thinking or anyone's way of life. Use your own. Be good and kind and respectful towards one another, please. And unfortunately, there are those out there who deny that the Holocaust has happened. They have their own agenda. You know it did happen. You heard it firsthand. Pass it on to others. And never forget to be kind and good towards one another, please. Okay. I would like to share a song with you. Not to worry, I won't sing. Mr. Hagen, are we able to play that? Okay, Miss.
We are.
We are. I just have to move my cable over, and there's going to be about a 10-second delay. Okay.
That's all right. I'll just introduce it. It's a song that's written by John Holt from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it's sung by an 11-year-old girl by the name of Lyric. Listen to the lyrics. Hopefully, you can watch the lyrics. You'll find them very meaningful. Okay, only 2 minutes of your time.
See that YouTube.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do. Oh no. Thank you.
Four perfect pebbles in my hand, some made of granite, some of sand, found in this dark and desolate land. Four perfect pebbles in my hand. Mother comforts Albert and me, Father shields us from misery. No parent's love can ever erase this sad and forgotten lonely place. Four perfect pebbles do I see, one for each member of my family. I hold them tight, I will not cry, all will live, no one will die. If I should lose my precious stones, my secret hiding place will reveal more perfect
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. Mr. Higgins, Mr. Shea, Dr. Rubin, many, many thanks for having given me the opportunity to be with you this morning. And I wish each and every one of you a joyous holiday, joyous Christmas, happy Hanukkah, and a wonderful, healthy, peaceful 2025 to each and every one of you. Enjoy your vacations. And consider yourself hugged, okay? Consider yourself hugged. Say goodbye. Thanks. Say
Bye-bye.
goodbye. Say, okay.
Thanks, Nathaniel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Birthday.
Oh, yes, happy birthday.
Same thing. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You all consider yourself hugged, okay? Wonderful. Stay well and enjoy your vacation and have a wonderful, wonderful 2025 for you and your families. Okay? Thank you.